Hi everyone, it's AuDHD Abby. I want to follow up on the introduction video and just talk about like how I came to know I was AuDHD, autistic and an ADHDer because everyone's journey here is slightly different. And I think when you're thinking about, am I neurodivergent? Am I not? There's a lot to grapple with. And I think it's totally normal that everyone arrives here in it from a different route. My route was quite similar for people my age who are now diagnosed, which is I found out through social media. And it was quite a revelation. It was during COVID. So I would say it was just before ADHD was really peaking on social media. I was doing a course at the time, I was really struggling with some coursework. And I just happened to see an ADHD iceberg meme on Instagram. And I looked at this picture and I cried for 3 hours. And I'm not much of a crier, I have to say. I'm not a crier. I was like, this explains so much about me. And then obviously I went on an absolute ADHD hyper focus of Instagram and any media I could get my hands on. And there was just so many questions swirling in my head. Am I ADHD? I can't be because I wasn't a naughty school kid that threw my chair around. And I think ADHD is only for boys. And can you even be ADHD as an adult? There were so many questions because literally all I knew about ADHD was naughty schoolboys that throw stuff around and cannot concentrate for more than 5 seconds. And I was like, I know that there's something different. There's something wrong with me. I've spent most of my life feeling broken, like I can't function like everyone else, and being like, why? It's obviously me. Like I am just wrong in some way. And feeling like that for most of your life and then having a possible explanation for it is like someone saying, by the way, you might not be broken. There might be a legitimate reason for you feeling like this and for you functioning like this. And I was thinking, if this is the case, then this explains so much. And I was like, I need to know. So, what I did is in classic ADHD impulsivity, I went online and I was like, how do I get diagnosed? And then all of these psychiatry services came up. And like I said, it was just before the peak. So I was really lucky. I was really lucky that I had savings. I was really lucky that it was just before the peak. And I got a diagnosis within 2 months. I did the forms and then did the assessments, which were virtual online because of COVID and just easier. And yeah, got diagnosed with combined ADHD. Combined ADHD is inattentive and hyperactive. So a lot of women have the hyperactivity traits internalized. So really busy brains. And then with the inattentive, that is more common as a diagnosis for women. And that is when people get this kind of like dreamboat or like dreamy, spacey accusations around who they are and how they show up. So I have both, which I was like, that explains a lot. And there was so much relief. I just wanted to tell people, but I didn't know how to tell people because I didn't know how they were going to react. There's such a common phenomenon when you've been diagnosed or you think that you are neurodivergent to feel this imposter syndrome. I know I've got the diagnosis and I really know in my gut that is me. But what if people don't think I'm ADHD enough? And that was a genuine thing for me because I'm not bouncing off the walls. I'm quite quiet. I'm quite low energy some days. So I just thought, oh, I don't know. So I told a couple of people and I started getting quite negative reactions. And I was like, oh dear, this is not the validation that I was looking for. Because obviously, I was going out into the world and trying to get validation. And that is, yeah, low self esteem, which comes from years of thinking that you're a crap person. So I was like, please, someone validate me. And yeah, it just didn't happen. So then I was like, wow, okay, I'm on my own with this huge revelation. I'm on my own. And yeah, it took years. It took years to learn about it, to grieve, to figure out how to show up with it in the world. Who do I tell? Who don't I tell? What treatment do I need? I never went down the medication route. That's obviously completely like personal to everyone, but just to let you know, I never went down that route. I got ADHD coaching, which is how I then became a coach, and just seeked as many resources, books, podcasts, articles, anything I could find on it, just absorbed it, found online communities, joined them. And just to know that I wasn't alone was a huge part of my journey to accepting what has happened to me and finding out about my brain. So that was ADHD. Autism, slightly more complicated because autism shows up so differently for women than it does for men, typically. And it is all to do with our social conditioning. So, as young girls, we are socially conditioned differently to boys. Like from a very young age, we are told, be a good girl, don't be loud, don't be this, don't be that, look this way, talk like this. We're so conditioned in every way, whereas boys can be boys or they're just being a boy. So that's really reductive. So I'm aware I'm doing that, but just, yeah, to help elaborate this point, girls are very socially conditioned. We learn to give eye contact. We learn that our special interests are not socially acceptable, so we hide them, or we get really socially acceptable interests like makeup or studying people. We study people and behavior because we want to fit in, so we want to emulate. So we start emulating people around us. We start emulating people on TV shows, really fine tuning what we wear and how we show up in the world. So that makes us really hard to diagnose in some cases, not in every case, obviously, but particularly when there's that combination of lack of awareness around how autism is showing up differently in girls and just generally, a lack of awareness around autism. And so, autism, we've seen a real spike in awareness recently. And then there's this spike in awareness around how autism and ADHD are showing up as a combined condition. So when I got my ADHD diagnosis, and what is really common is when you start working on your ADHD symptoms, if you're autistic as well, you then start noticing your autistic traits, because ADHD quite often counterbalances some autistic traits. So the impulsivity of ADHD will show up in those social situations where you're feeling socially anxious, you don't know what to say, you're trying to make enough eye contact. ADHD joins the party and is, woo, let me bring my impulsivity. But actually, there's that autistic part of you that's, I'm feeling like really shy and nervous and I don't want to be here. I would rather be on my own. That's just like one example of how ADHD can cover autism. It's obviously really complicated. So I'm really worried that I'm going to be reducing this too much. But yeah, essentially, once you start understanding your ADHD, your autism becomes more apparent if you are autistic. And this is where I was like, oh no, I don't want another diagnosis. And I think that's definitely my internalized ableism. I think there is more shame around autism, and that's really horrible and hard to say. It's less socially acceptable, which is, and I'm saying this, and maybe I'm going to get backlash for saying that, but a lot of autistic people find it challenging to navigate social situations because of the difference. It's like speaking another language, it's your brain is literally wired up to speak another language socially. And I struggled, I grappled with the idea of having an autism diagnosis. I'm now in a much, much better place with accepting my autism. Like I said, it took me a good 2 years. I realized I would also get an autism diagnosis and I didn't want to accept it. And then slowly, I just couldn't ignore it. And I just was like, I just know this is me. And now I fully embraced it. Now feel like I've found who I am. Although I am an ADHDer, there was an element of it where I was like, this isn't fully me. There's something missing. And the part that was missing was the autism. So it's obviously still fairly early days, and it keeps saying it is so complicated. So I'm going to try and unpick it as best as I can. But that's essentially how I got my diagnosis. There's obviously so many different routes and ways to get here, but reach out if you want any advice or you just want to chat about diagnosis and everything around that. All right. Thank you for listening and take care.